Hey, Mike here from Showboys. We're excited to bring you Showboys Gaming, a YouTube channel created for you to enjoy our exclusive gaming content. Anything from live streams to gaming videos will be found here. Go subscribe now so you don't miss out on any Showboys gaming content.
Too young for this trek. The final frontier. These are the voyages of
MC,
Troy, and Eric.
Their mission to introduce Tyler to strange new episodes.
To seek out the best and worst media in the Star Trek franchise.
To boldly go where several podcasts have probably gone before.
You could listen to these goobers talk about Star Trek by searching for Too Young for This Trek or by visiting probablywork.com.
Hey, Nick from Showboys here, and I want to invite you to become a member of the Showboys Discord. Our Discord is the one-stop shop for all things Showboys, from announcements to fun conversations, and of course, memes. Come get to know the Showboys staff and our growing community of pop culture fanatics. We have something for just about anyone.
Hi, I'm Becca.
And I'm Mike.
And we're the Courtneys.
We're the hosts of a new marriage and relationship centered podcast called Couple Conversations. We're not here to give marriage or relationship advice, but instead we're just going to have some honest and thought-provoking conversations about our relationship.
After 10 years of marriage and the chaos of parenting, business ownership, and being content creators, we thought it was important to focus on dating each other and keep the spark alive in our marriage, so when we're old and wrinkly, we still enjoy each other's company.
Each week, we'll be going through a series of questions to have honest conversations about our relationship, as well as occasionally be joined by other couples to hear their stories and advice. We just want to share the things that we've learned along our journey and remind you all to continue to date your spouse.
So join us every other Friday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, beginning October 8th, and join the conversation.
Hello, welcome to Showboys. My name's Mike. Here we are another week, joined by Nick. The studio here just kind of looks a little empty when it's just the two of us.
I know we've had so many co-hosts and guests this summer.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're slightly getting used to a crowded studio here.
Yeah, it's been a fun summer with all the guests and our new co-hosts. Plural co-hosts, which is awesome. But it's nice to get back to, a classic Showboys, just Nick and Mike.
Classic October Showboys.
Yeah, but not like classic Showboys, because that'd be like Mike, Nick, and Cody. This is just classic Showboys.
Yeah, this is almost we are our two 2 days since the anniversary of Analog Horror episode. Shout out Analog Horror episode.
Shout out. I think, that's probably both of our favorite episode. It's my favorite episode.
Yeah, for sure.
We got underfunded. He hit us up with a like before we even came in here. And I was excited.
Yeah, we should just like plug that as soon as we can, so it just pops up in the stream, like during the intro song.
Yeah, and then he just did a reverse psychology and hit us up with the oi or oi. And then of course just the two of us. We can make it if we try. That's right. We're gonna make this episode hopefully a good one for you guys.
We will try.
We will most definitely try. So this is week 3 of Spooktober. So we're excited to dig into the topic tonight. Nick picked out a good one, I think. Why don't you tell the lovely listeners what we're going to get into tonight?
Yeah. So after this jam-packed summer of just, big conversations, lots of people in the studio, and then it was this was shaping up to be an episode of just Mike and I, kind of like a traditional set. So I think we're always kind of in our pocket and at our best when we kind of pick a thematic topic to which we explore together on air on the episode, right? We do the research the day of, and sometimes it's either completely fresh to one of us or fairly fresh and not fresh to both of us. And I feel like we've landed on one of those topics, and this topic right here in the middle of October, we'll be exploring horror through the ages and through the decades, the different ages of horror, if you will, of primarily film horror, and obviously that branches out these days into series and shows and things like that.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when I was doing my research and stuff. It was hard to not include series on here. We didn't talk about including series, so I left them out. But recently, the last 5 years, maybe decade, we've had a lot of really good horror shows.
Right.
I'm thinking specifically Mike Flanagan's stuff on Netflix over the last several years. I'm sure there's others, but those are the ones that immediately pop out into mind. But tonight's episode's kind of going to be like the inverse of our Christmas classic episode, where we kind of went through the decades of all the amazing Christmas movies. We're going to kind of explore like Nick said, the different eras of horror and some of the most influential films of those eras, and just kind of approach this episode with our newly coined method of podcasting, which Nick came up with this morning, and that's the IED method. Which I don't remember exactly what it stands for, but when you told it to me this morning, I was like, that's a perfect description, and I love it. And I think tonight's going to be a great example of that method for the Showboys. So what's the IED method?
Yeah, not to be confused with the
military
terror
stuff.
weapon,
Yeah, right.
Improvised explosive device. So our IED method is inform, explore, and discuss. And I feel like that's kind of in some order there. We kind of hit on those 3 points. I think at some point someone described us as kind of like an informative podcast about things, but I also in that think while we inform, Mike and I are also directly exploring these topics live.
And
we definitely
we're kind of informing each other as we go.
Yeah, exactly. we definitely don't come on here and claim to be any sort of experts about anything. So it's very much a live exploration, informing and discussing.
That's right. And I think one thing we've been doing kind of in the background the last couple days, which, super boring, but we're adding, going back through our past episodes and adding timestamps to our YouTube video. But in doing that, and like Nick said, the 1-year anniversary of Analog Horror is coming up today. I had the task of, re-listening to that episode and taking notes on the different timestamps and whatnot. And that's another like perfect example of the Showboys IED method of podcasting. That was such a fun episode, and we did exactly that. Like myself being a fan of Analog Horror, I informed Nick and the audience what exactly Analog Horror is. We explored that topic pretty, I wouldn't say like super in depth, but
we scratched the surface.
And that led to a bunch of discussion between Nick and I. And I think, by the end of the episode, Nick walked away with a better understanding of Analog Horror. And hopefully anyone who's listened to that episode has done the same. And not to continue on about the IED method, but like, I'm just thinking about it. Like, I think when we've done our episodes in that manner, those are the most fun, and I think probably our best episodes. And now that we talked about it, we can like try to intentionally approach our episodes like that, because they were just kind of happening by happy accident before. But enough about that.
The real update is Mike and I are actually in the same building. There's actually just a small like half wall between us, because like see the red from his lights is kind of bleeding over into my office. So we're actually in the same studio.
He's like on the other side of this wall.
Yeah.
My basement's real big.
Yep, big basement.
No, before we get too much into the episode here, just want to shout out our top patrons real quick, and that's good old Tim B and Yusuf H. Thank you guys so much for your support on Patreon. It means the world to us. If you would like to check out our Patreon and see how you could support Showboys and Showboys Gaming, you can head over to patreon.com/showboyspodcast. We have 4 different tiers starting as low as $1 a month. You could help support the show. There's some back end cost to hosting sites and things of that nature. So your support really does help out a lot. And along with the tiers come some pretty cool perks and benefits and rewards. So you'll want to check those out. And if you're able to sign up, that would be amazing. If you're not, that's totally cool too. We're just happy you're here watching or listening. Just make sure you subscribe if you enjoy what you hear. But yeah, we have just 2 little reminders before we dive into the episode here. We have the second episode of the Couple Conversations podcast. That will be on October 22nd, so next Friday. That's our marriage and relationship podcast that my wife and I do. We had our first episode last week, and it was pretty fun. So I'm excited to get into the second episode there. And of course, our newscast coming up on the 25th. So yeah, the newscast. It's our like redheaded stepchild of Showboys. I feel like it doesn't get the attention it deserves, but it
really doesn't. But it's really become one of my favorite things that we do here at Showboys. Obviously it's written, shout out Cody, but we provide the articles and he basically summarizes them and reread them. But I don't know, it's a good chance for us to be pleasantly, surprised reading news live. Like, we don't even read the articles most of the time these days, so it's kind of fresh to us.
Yeah, it just makes it more fun because Cody will slip in like some Anchorman typos in the teleprompter.
Yeah. And I just like that also. It's just like I like commenting on those things, those current happenings and events, because that's just so much good room for keeping up with stuff. But I did have a question. So is Couples Conversations twice a month then?
We do it every other week, kind of like we do the newscast. But it's just Becca and I, and we have this deck of conversation starter cards that we bought for the drive on vacation. And they're all like relationship focused, and we pick one, and then we just talk about whatever that question is on the card. And the conversation we got into on our first episode was really cool, and it's interesting to like intentionally think about those things in our relationship. And I don't know, it's good. But I'm really excited about the next episode here coming up. So come hang out with us, join in the conversation. We live stream.
Exciting.
Yeah, we live stream just like we do here at Showboys. So yeah. So let's start off the episode with week 2 of our horror movie review section. So last week we reviewed Darkness Falls and VHS Viral, and we picked It Follows for this week's review. So last night Nick and I both watched It Follows, and I'm excited to get into it, hear what you thought about it.
I have notes, a couple.
Oh, okay, cool. We'll discuss this, and then hopefully by the end of the episode, either from suggestions in our Answer the Boys segment, or anyone that's watching a live stream, if you guys want to suggest some horror movies for Nick and I to watch, we'll pick one and watch it and review it next week on the episode. And if we don't really get any suggestions that we haven't seen or aren't really catching our fancy, I think from the topic of tonight's episode, we should have quite a few options to pick from. I would assume.
I hope.
Yeah.
Seeing how I haven't probably seen any of these movies before, like 1980.
Right. So
it's a 100-year-old genre.
Yes. Why don't you go ahead and let me know what you thought about It Follows.
Man, It Follows. So what did Chad say about this movie? It's like his top 5, or like scary. Is that what he said? I forget.
I don't remember the exact verbiage, but I believe
he spoke highly of
it. Yeah. And also Cody, I remember him talking to me about this movie, a year or two ago, back when we worked together. This came up a lot in conversation with Cody, so I think he also is a big fan of It Follows.
Okay. Yeah, and I can see why. I definitely am not. I don't know. So I was really thinking about it, the whole movie, and it's that style, that kind of like almost slasher, eerie style, but almost like campy, right? Mm-hmm. And I definitely though felt like this movie played into that kind of campiness, but also did it in like a kind of tasteful way. The kind of like the cinematography, or like the panning shots and the way it was edited together, I thought was really interesting, because there were moments like between scenes where they're kind of just showing, the area, right? They're just kind of, and also these like circular panning shots where most of it has nothing's going on. I don't think I was missing anything. They're really just kind of like these weird, like quiet moments, right? In between dialogue. And the dialogue too, like goes from good to like okay. But it's also that kind of like teen awkwardness too, is what it was kind of capturing as well. But yeah, it's for a type of movie I don't watch at all, really. I did like it. It did give me like anxiety or worry of fear. But the weird part about it though was it was all in the middle of the movie. The beginning I didn't, and then by the end I also didn't have any fear. I almost found it funny by the end, or you know what I mean. It's weird. And I also haven't seen a lot of these movies to really kind of compartmentalize it into what it is and what it's trying to be.
Right.
So interested to learn more about it or movies like it.
About it.
So
yeah, remind me about the camera point you made in a little bit.
Okay.
Because I have an explanation of that. But before we get into it, I thought maybe I'll kind of summarize the movie a little bit and kind of talk about what happens without really spoiling what happens.
Yeah.
So It Follows came out in 2014, so that's 7 years now. So spoiler alert if you haven't seen a 7-year-old movie. Well, not really spoiler alert. I'm just gonna give like the synopsis, right? So
Yeah,
but no, because in the review we'll talk spoiler alert. I've alerted, then I've retracted, and now we're alerting again. Okay, because in my review I'll probably talk about some plot details and stuff. So It Follows, the premise of the movie is a person is followed by something only they can see, and it is trying to kill them, and the only way to prevent it from killing them is to pass it along to somebody else. So that's just like the very general synopsis of the movie. But to get in the details, you pass it along to somebody by having sex with them. And yeah, after you pass it along, you can still see it, but it stops following you and follows who you passed it along to. And if it kills the person that you pass it along to, it will then start following you and come to kill you. So you have to pass it along, and then the person you pass it along to has to pass it along, and it's just a vicious cycle of continuing to pass this along to save your own life, right? So for me, it's a very obvious like social commentary on like STDs, right? Because I mean, you pass it along from having sex,
Sure.
and some of them are bad and kill you, and blah blah blah. So like, there's that, and I'm sure there's a lot more like intricate things and commentary in the movie. But having only seen it once and then not really looking on the internet for other people's opinions, I couldn't tell you what else it dives into social commentary wise, like right off the top of my head. But as far as the camera point, the cinematography point you made when you were talking, I think those, while on the surface, seem to be just kind of like artsy and quiet moments in the movie. I believe they're very intentional in just building tension, because the whole time the person's being followed, right? So, and the thing is, what's following you can appear as different people. It appears as a person, but it can appear as different people at any time, right? So it doesn't always have like specific look, so it could realistically be anybody that's in a scene, right? So I think they did a great job using those, especially the scenes you're talking about, where it's just a continuous like circling of the environment in a scene, because it'll like circle around almost 2 times and land back at the starting spot. And like during those moments, you're just, at least I was like really nervous, because I'm like, oh, maybe it's around, but I don't know, because it could be anything, and maybe it's nothing. And I think they did a really good job of really building tension and suspense in that way. Also, another thing to note about what's following them is it walks at like your your stereotypical like
Slow
slasher,
Yeah.
like, you know, Michael Myers walk, where it's just like you can technically not outrun it, but put a lot of distance between you and it to buy yourself more time, but it will eventually always catch up to you and find you.
Logistically, I really like that about the movie in that,
Yeah.
like, because you know they drive great distances at times, or at least they
Yeah.
appear to, and then it's just this idea that you left this thing in the dust, but it is constantly, continuously walking at this set pace, and it will eventually get to you.
Yeah.
I think just like that's just like unnerving
Yeah, very much so.
for sure.
I also liked how all the characters in the movie, with the exception of the dude, I forget his name, the main
Greg.
characters. Is it Greg?
You
No,
said Greg.
I did say Greg. No, the first guy, the first boyfriend
Yeah.
that originally gives it to the main character. Like he's 21 or something, but all the other kids are like high school age.
So
I think that's kind of what it looked like.
So
Maybe
here-
early college, but they're like
That's
young
the-
kids. There's like not adults, like grown adults, right?
and if
the
there are,
parents,
there's something wrong with them. They're like neglectful
Yeah.
parents, or
Yeah.
there's but the whole movie, and I still don't know, and maybe this was like a decision they made that was confusing to me, and it's not a problem. It's just interesting, like film and movie wise, like
Mhm.
the setting. So it looks like they look like the 90s kind of,
Mhm.
but they seem to be in the 70s. But the one girl's on like that little shell like Kindle thing, and I didn't
Yeah.
think they had those. Maybe they did, but I didn't think those existed until definitely after 2000, right? Like a little digital book.
Yeah.
So like that's weird. The TVs are all tube and super old. Like they look like they're from the 60s. The cars at first were a mix between like 70s and like 2000s, and then they all kind of shaped out to be 70s. So definitely the place and time and whatever the year is very confusing to me.
Yeah. Some of the like shots of riding through like the downtown or whatever like made me think of Canton. Like I was riding through downtown Canton.
Well, they're in Detroit.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
they reference like
8 Mile.
8 Mile, which
Yeah.
was cool. But yeah, I think also this movie really nails home the value, which is usually the opposite of like playing down and like making fun of, but like this movie shows value of being in the friend zone. You know? I really wish I remember characters' names. I should have taken notes on names, but
Forget them.
the main characters, the boy of the group, right?
Yeah.
Like is so into the main character, and like he's just like head over heels for this chick, and he's totally in the friend zone. But dude, you're not gonna get any, so it's not gonna follow you. Like you're safe.
Yeah, but he kind of
Yeah, hey, no spoil. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, he takes one for the team. Finally, like, you know, I don't
gets out of the friend
achieves
zone.
his goal. Like, I don't know, his dreams are realized.
Is that the social commentary too? Like the person in the friend zone, their strive to get out of the friend zone so dire that they will accept this curse to be not in the friend zone.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
that's how bad the
It's
friend
like,
zone is. It's like the only way to get out and be okay with it
Yeah.
is she has
is
to be able to get
forever
rid of...
chased to your death.
Now I was wondering, and I also didn't look anything up about it, but does she not know it's still following him? Because he was supposed to go give it to a hooker,
Right.
but he just drove by and didn't, and it was still following them at the end.
Was it though? I think that's kind of like a little Inception going on. Like, that's the vibe I was getting, is like, did he not pick up the prostitute, or did he? Like,
I
is
don't think
that
he did.
person following them like it? Or
Yeah.
like that's a thing that I think the movie did really well, is like add a layer of paranoia, right?
Yes,
Because
right.
like for me, I was like, is that, I don't know. That could be it. Is it it? I don't know. Did he pass it on to the like, is this happily ever after? Because the prostitute's gonna pass it on. So like whenever if the prostitute passed it on to somebody and that person didn't pass it on and it goes back to the prostitute, well, she's gonna have sex with somebody else because she's a prostitute. So like
it's almost perfect.
Honestly, see, like this is the great thing about our IED method, is like all this revelation is coming to us right now.
Yeah.
Like that guy literally like won. He is the true hero, because like that is a genius move. You will always be safe if you pass it along to a prostitute.
I don't think he did though.
I think that's a great question.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to look that up after this episode.
Logistically though, I don't know how he could hide it from her and be cool and chill with it, right? Just always back there, because I always thought back to like the early scene in the movie theater where like he saw the chick in the yellow dress and he realized it was it.
Yeah, that was so good.
While we couldn't see it, all the like, there's the shots of the girl he got it from, I think, and how she died or whatever, like his old girlfriend that died from it first, that they showed at the beginning of the movie. You just realize how like the way they acted, right, and why they acted, because it's like this thing eventually catches up to you, and then you somehow click and you're like, oh, that's it. Obviously it walks really weird toward you the whole time, but
yeah. And a lot of the its were nude, so I mean, I guess that'd be kind of easy to to point out in a crowd. Oh, that naked person's probably it. I should probably get away right now.
Yeah, and you almost want to wonder like the psychology of this thing, because how does it decide who to be? Because sometimes it was his mother at first, because it just wanted the kill, apparently.
Yeah,
but other times
like, to her it was him, and then when he opens the door it's his mom. So like, yeah, that's a very good point.
So I wonder about the times when it disguises itself more discreetly to get right to you versus the times it's just a naked old person walking through the middle of the park. Like, duh.
Dude, my favorite was when towards the end of the movie, when they go to like the cabin on the lake or whatever, and it's just an old naked dude standing on the roof, and I'm like, what a scene.
It has a psychology though to it. I mean, these different things, the way it behaves proves that, because it didn't want to kill her because it played with her hair. Like, dude, it just like sprung at him and like raped him to death. Meanwhile, with her, it like messed with her hair. It held on to her. Like, it was like tormenting her.
Dude, that was such a great scene. I was wondering if they were going to touch base on like being able to interact with the people who can't see it.
Right.
So the hair thing was awesome. The fact that friend zone guy hit it with the chair and then got like drop kicked into oblivion or whatever was super cool.
Well, up until that point, you don't know if it's physically in the world or not.
Right. You just, if it's just, their imagination or a mind trick or something. But the way they handled that was really cool, and I really appreciated that. I think, shoot, what was it? To your point about like, it's not like scary. It's not like, I mean, there were some jump scares, but it's more of that psychological paranoia, stressful, uneasy type horror, like very unsettling. But I will say one part actually like made me feel scared, and that was I have a thing with like people who are too tall. like
My bad.
yeah. No, but the scene where it breaks the window of her house and is in the house and they're hiding out in the room, and
Yeah.
the dorky girl that's reading on the like shell Kindle thing opens the door and it's not behind her, or it's
Yeah.
just her, but then like the really tall like it comes through the doorway, and I was just like, oh no, get that off my screen. And because
So were you terrified of Doug?
yes. Shout out Doug. But no, it's the same on Haunting of Hill House, the big tall ghost that roams the house there with the like old fashioned
Oh
top hat and
yeah.
stuff.
So Lurch, like from Addams Family?
It's just like unnaturally tall people. It just no thanks. And the way that it just like comes like right through her, and like, but wait,
it didn't.
Okay, how did it get through her? Because we just talked about the beach scene.
Did it go through her though?
It had to come from somewhere because she was standing in front of the door, and then all of a sudden, big tall dude just comes through.
Well, that's the thing, because early on, before they kind of really stated that like it has to walk from point A to point B constantly, I was like, does it eventually just appear in your vicinity, right? And then it starts its like approach. You know what I mean? That's
right.
Versus like, does it literally have to walk from Boston to Detroit, for example, to catch up with you?
Yeah, dude, just go on a road trip.
Yeah, take a plane, go somewhere. Go.
Yeah.
It can't go in water. Can't you just leave the continent?
Can it go in water?
It didn't want to go in the pool at all. It avoided the pool.
True.
Actually, it died in the pool. It disappeared and it like reset, I guess.
Yeah. So just go live on a houseboat.
Yeah, an island or.
Chad says that tall dude is so freaking scary. Easily one of the scariest moments I've ever seen in a movie. I don't know if I would go that far, but it definitely made me feel very uncomfortable. And I was just like, as I was walking down the hallway going to bed that night, like, and I turned around to shut my door, I was just like, man, if there's just like a big tall dude on my steps right now, I just will literally have a heart attack. But yeah, I think overall for me, I enjoy this style of movie very much. This is like my genre of horror, the psychological, stressful, which I don't know why I like stressful movies, but this one was stressful. I really enjoy this type, mainly because they tend to have really, I mean, most horror movies cover some sort of social commentary, but like I really enjoy the approach that these types of horror movies take and what types of social commentary they are providing.
A slow walking approach, you mean?
Yeah. But like, I don't know. I think it is a really cool concept for a movie that when you explain it sounds like really dumb, really, in a way, So you have sex with somebody and then something just walks at you until it kills you. Like that just kind of sounds silly, but I don't know. I think it was a really well executed movie. I mean, it did have it's hiccups here and there, but by and large overall I'd say it is a pretty good movie. And I'm excited that I finally got around to watching it.
It is 95% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes for whatever that's worth.
That's fresh.
It's certified fresh. Yeah, I mean, I think Chad says sexually transmitted demon sounds better, which is an STD.
Yeah, for sure.
Get those stay away from those demons. But I think it does it well, whether you like these movies or not, the style movie, it takes a very tasteful approach to these different elements. And to me, just logistically, like I was kind of like being a nerd about. I'm like, well, technically, you can figure out how fast it walks, and then if you go so many miles, you know how long you have. But yeah, it was a good movie. I definitely enjoyed watching it. But the part about the end being kind of funny to me, where it kind of all just shed itself, because it spent a good part of the movie building up, explaining it slowly through like cues and different clues and just the way it behaved. And then by the end, and that's where I was kind of getting to this thing psychology. Like there is kind of like a weird game you even can play with it. Because like the first guy, the boyfriend, he was kind of a pro at finagling this thing. Just as how he kind of transmitted to her and put her in the wheelchair and like just kept the distance kind of thing. Like he knew what he was doing.
Yeah, that whole like he just chloroforms her and then straps her to a wheelchair.
Well,
and then like gets really close to it, and like I loved that whole thing where he's like to make sure she understands like that this is real and she has to like do what he says and find a way to pass it on. Like that was really interesting, and I at first I thought for some reason that he was just killing her, and then I was like, why is she in a wheelchair? And I was like, oh, this is actually like really smart on his part, which makes me sound like a terrible person. But I mean, like in that situation, like she's gonna believe him if he tells her, right? And then if she dies, it sucks for him because it's just gonna follow him again, right? So, anyways, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, you're
Continue.
good. No, I think that was about it. Yeah, I like the movie. I don't know if I'd watch it again. I guess I'd watch it again if someone hadn't seen it and wanted to watch it. I'd watch it again. But yeah, it's a good movie.
I do think it's funny when Friend Zone was trying to like shoot it,
dude,
at
that
the
was
pool,
so stupid.
And then like shot Nerd Girl,
and no one cares. She's just back there,
she's just
holding her
sitting there
leg,
bleeding out with a bullet in her calf, and everyone's like, "Try to shoot the invisible thing."
Like she should have moved, or I don't know. It was all bad gunplay.
I do like how they threw the blanket over it. That was smart.
I was like, you need some spray paint, dude.
Yeah,
that thing has a gnarly throw. Like it was hitting her in the head like every time.
Yeah. Also, shooting at it while it was holding on to her underwater. Like, how did she not get shot with like four of those?
Yeah, those
6
bullets
shots
skirting through the water. I was like,
yeah,
please.
But yeah, so I would recommend. I'll probably do some more or like some actual digging into the movie, and depending on what I find, I might give it a watch again. It was entertaining. You know, I feel like it could be one of those movies where a second or third watch could allow you to pick up on some additional things that you may have missed in the first watch. But overall, I like it. Thanks for the recommendation, Chad. Glad that I finally got around to watching it. Sorry, Cody, for not watching it like 2 years ago when you told me to.
Yeah, and Aaron was like, "Is this the one about the clown?" And I'm like, "I don't think it is, even though they're both it."
Yeah, that's a little deceiving there, but you know, what are you gonna do? B Hero chimed in a little while ago. I didn't forget about you. I wasn't ignoring you. I just wanted to wait till we got through that little segment there. And they say, "Have you seen the Babadook?" I want to say I have not, but I know of it. For some reason, I get this movie and Insidious confused. I know it's probably really dumb of me.
I've seen that,
but yeah, I've seen Insidious, and then like I think of the Babadook and think I've seen it, but I'm really thinking of Insidious. So
I saw Insidious when it came out, and I'm pretty sure it scared, like it terrifies me. Like that was a hard watch. I'm pretty sure, though I don't remember why or what, but the red demon guy was really scary.
Yeah.
So I want to rewatch that and like reframe how scary that is in my current state of being.
Yes. This movie will probably come up during the episode here, so
no way.
Yeah. But yeah, dude. If you guys have recommendations. I think we might have a couple in our Answer the Boys question, but feel free if you're out there watching in live stream land, send in your suggestions for next week's horror movie review. I've really enjoyed doing these. I'm having fun doing it. So
yeah, I like that we both watch the same movie. I think that works a little better.
Yeah, for sure. Also, we can't forget that BioSiv recommended, one of his recommendations of the two that we were trying to choose from last week. Murder Party is still an intriguing option for me. So that might be on the docket as well. So
I'd be cool with that.
Well, excuse me.
Don't
Random
die.
dry spot in my throat. Yeah. So let's dig into the actual topic tonight. How exactly do you want to do this? So we both kind of went off of two different articles, and yeah, we just kind of want to go through the eras or possibly decades of horror movies, kind of how horror has evolved through those eras and decades, and maybe touch on, or at the very least name some of the, or at least this is what I wanted to talk about. I don't know exactly what you wanted to talk about, but touch on a few of the films from each era or decade that kind of helped define it. But what were you thinking about touching on tonight?
Yeah, so I think I kind of more focus on kind of like conceptual and like the changing of the eras, kind of like what made each era what it was, right? Less so kind of like specific examples and things like that. More kind of stylistic choices and kind of what was going on in the world that kind of made that era of horror kind of pop and become what it was. But I definitely want to start off, and I will say that a lot of kind of my guide was this really well written article from Ordinary Times by this Luis A. Mendez, and this is from 2019. And to me, it was a really well written article, and kind of broke it up really well.
We'll definitely link both articles that we kind of worked off of in our episode description for you guys, so you can take a gander. But yeah, tell us about this article.
Yeah, so I liked how this one opened, and what it did was, hopefully it's true, but it made the effort to kind of cite the very first horror film. So it reads off as in 1896, a French pioneering filmmaker called Georges Méliès created a 3-minute film about basically a trip to an evil demonic castle, and this was called Les Manoirs de Diable, or the Devil's Castle. And basically, it's just kind of like a supernatural story about this castle, and it had ghosts, witches, bats, and even the devil himself. And it had a lot of classic horror tropes, and it was the very first kind of like film of having all of these things kind of in there, and the goal of the film and how it kind of wraps up is all these things are vanquished, and it's considered the first ever horror film ever made. So I thought that was a very good kind of like premise here, right? That I just found it intriguing that it's a 3-minute film from over 100 years ago.
Yeah, that's actually a really cool little
1896
factoid there.
Yeah, and that's just, I mean, that's a long genre. That's a huge genre. And maybe that, I don't know if that's always appreciated, like how old this genre is. And as we go through it in the episode, and obviously as I went through these articles, it's crazy to me that there are so many different eras of horror, right? And just the history that's packed into this genre. And it kind of makes sense of, just how embedded into our lives, right, it is. I was telling Aaron, I was like, there aren't many holidays that get a whole month of themed festivities, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's like maybe 3, but like October, Halloween, horror, scary hits second hardest to basically December.
Yeah.
Right? Like Easter, April, maybe, like that's like a week, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Thanksgiving, it's like this weird time packed in between spooky time and
it's
holly jolly time.
Just a little palate cleanse.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a
little rinse of water for the holidays.
You stuff yourself with Thanksgiving food, you like pass out and you wake up and it's like,
Christmas. Yeah. So B Hero jumps in, says, didn't he kind of duck around her? I'm going to say
I think he's
talking
right.
about Tall Guy from It Follows, which, very well could have, but I was a little freaked out. So maybe I closed my eyes. And do we need to call Aaron down there? Make sure you're okay, man.
My coaster keeps sticking to the bottom of my drink.
Okay. I was just getting worried you're spilling stuff all over your computer or something.
No, never.
But very valid point, B Hero. He probably did. I was probably just too scared to realize what was happening.
Tall man, hide.
Yeah. Oh, wait. Did you clip that? My
no,
shriek.
I didn't.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, it's not funny. What year did you say? 18 what?
1896.
1896. Wow. That's
3-minute film.
That is what, 1896? That's so it's 15 years ish, maybe 25 years. I can't do math. But the first
125 years ago, pretty sure.
Yeah, no. I'm talking about, so the article I read, the first era of horror that they referenced began in 1910 and ran to 1920.
Yes.
And they call this they called it Where It Mostly Began. So they referenced a film called L'Inferno, and that was from 1911. This was the first full-length film in Italy, which is kind of a neat little tidbit. And it was about the first part of Dante's Divine Comedy, aka Dante's Inferno. And yeah, they cite this as kind of like the beginning, the start of, the horror genre. But yours, sounds like the true beginning, because it was what, Satan's Castle they called it.
Yeah, it was the Devil's Castle.
The Devil's Castle.
But
I mean, that's pretty horrific.
I think I need to track this down. It's a 3-minute film that has all those things in it, and they vanquish them. Like,
yeah. I mean,
the
it might
length
not
of a
be
song.
good, but
right,
the guy walks into the Devil's Castle and then kills the devil.
Right.
There you go. That's the end of the movie.
Ta-da.
But yeah, they they also referenced the following films as kind of being this era's most influential, these being A Night of Horror from 1916, and this was the first film depicting vampires. It starred a gentleman named Emil Jannings, who became the first man to win an Academy Award for Best Actor, which is kind of neat. Little factoid there. And then The Avenging, so it's spelled conscience, but like, it's weird. But this was from 1914, and this was an American film here, made by D.W. Griffith, and it was based on some Edgar Allan Poe tales, which is kind of cool. Another notable film from this era, which I've seen also being credited to 1920 and 1919, so it's kind of like between this era and the next era, is The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is a pretty highly rated horror flick, apparently. Obviously, I've never seen any of these movies. Full disclosure, most of the movies referenced on my notes here are movies that I have not seen, but I looked at many, many, many sites today, and all of these are very highly rated and regarded, at least amongst the critics. So what else did your article kind of say about this first era or this first age of horror movies?
Yeah, so essentially, yeah, same general time frame, right, leading up into the 1920s, and basically, in my research, they kind of call this the silent era of horror, where because mostly all the films at the time were silent films.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of like the leading factor, which obviously there's a lot of like thematic and different. It's different, right? Think about a
Yeah.
horror film and all the things that we've talked about already this Spooktober about how we get scared, right? Sound and music's a huge part of that. So imagine, you know, being
Silence.
scared by silence. Obviously, A Quiet Place dipped back into that, but there is still sound in it. Now, another thing that kind of gets mentioned a lot and kind of put into perspective is also, and this kind of, and this is kind of apparent, I think, with how horror evolved over the years. And it's basically kind of the constant, has it been done before? What hasn't the audience seen yet, right? And there's a specific era that really digs into that. So I just thought it was interesting. It's just interesting that like at the time, right? Like the things that were scaring people was this one particular actor at the time, Cheney is his last name.
Yeah, Dick Cheney?
Not Dick Cheney.
Oh.
But he was basically like the first kind of like movie star of horror. And the other interesting thing is Universal dates all the way back to this time. Like they're basically like they had the horror thing like on lock, and eventually in one of these eras they basically have the first universe,
cinematic universe.
We'll get into that, but
yeah, for sure.
But this Mr. Cheney here in the 20s, he would show up as all these different like monsters or like this heavy makeup and things, and that was just something that the audience had not seen before, right? So you go from just typical films of the time to this guy in this movie, and he looks scary, right? And just because they haven't seen it before, that's enough to hit the fear meter. Whereas like if we watch that today, it's like not scary at all. It's just a guy in a ton of makeup. So it's kind of, it's a big I take away from this is like it's a big perspective thing through the years of just how society has gotten used to this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So imagine what scared people in 1910 versus what scares people in 2010 or 2020.
Right. Yeah, there's been a lot of desensitizing or desensitization. I don't think either of those are words, but you know what I'm saying.
Desensitized.
Yeah, and it's funny when you look at it, like what the like like the themes and plots of some of these early horror movies, and how those have evolved, and it just kind of like it shows. I mean, obviously, it shows you what people feared in these eras, right? So like a lot of these early ones, about like Dracula and like the devil, and like it's very very much like religious, like fear of religion and like fear of like displeasing God in a way, right? And like fear of the devil and demons, and it's so cool to see, like as we were looking through all this stuff, like how the themes of these eras just like totally line up with society at that time, like world events at that time. And I mean, obviously it makes sense because art is going to reflect what people are living through clearly. But I don't know, I thought it was cool to look back in retrospect.
Yeah, and at this time Europe was kind of like the big pioneer, and it's specifically Germany, and that kind of takes root in a lot of German folklore, right? Even like Dracula in Transylvania, a lot of Central Europe themed type monsters and stuff like that. So that's kind of that's the early foundation of all this, and it's like you said, religious based, right? So all the scary stuff from the Bible or these things referenced, things like that. So very very rudimentary scary things,
Yeah.
right, were used.
Yep. And then as we as a society and civilization have gone down the path of perversion, so has the things that scare us, as we'll get into. But yeah, so the next era, it's funny that your article referred to the first era as the silent era, because the second era in my article they referred to as the silent era. But I mean, these are, you know,
Oh, okay, never
a
mind.
combination of 1910 to 1931. I mean, that's all like the silent era, if we're really.
Mine goes up to 1930, so I guess yeah. So you
Yeah.
have two eras where mine just kind of lumped it into one.
Yeah.
And it was in the 1930s where this Cheney guy was tapped by Universal Pictures to star as Dracula. And when I read that, I was like, Universal.
Yeah.
Like, you have such a storied past.
Yeah.
This storied past here, and you can't land. You're trying to land this MonsterVerse. And then it started to click. I was like, wow, their whole like MonsterVerse IP goes so far back.
Yeah, that's why a lot of people got like so excited about it, like when they kind of announced that, because their roots kind of are this, right? But yeah, so this article refers to the following films as being influential in the silent era between 1920 and 1931. The biggest is The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which, you know, I just referenced in the last one. Nosferatu, obviously, probably the most famous vampire movie of all time, is a Dracula knockoff. That was back from 1922. The Hunchback of Notre Dame, from 1923. Phantom of the Opera, 1925. And those three movies in particular, like you were referring to, Nick, since they're silent, they rely completely on visual, right? So these movies featured a lot of prosthetic work. If you've ever seen, you know, screenshots or clips of Nosferatu, like the vampire is like a hideous abomination. And if you saw a picture, Nick, if that's what you're looking up, like you would recognize Nosferatu. The Hunchback of Notre Dame, obviously we're familiar of at least the Disney version of that. But as you know, B Hero, if they're still in the stream here, their last episode they touched on like the Grimm fairy tales and stuff, and like what I loved about their episode going into that is like a lot of people overlook the dark and disturbing origins of a lot of Disney movies.
The best part.
Like a lot of those stories and tales and stuff are just really horrific. Hunchback of Notre Dame being one of those. And then Phantom of the Opera, like, you know, all these characters in these movies like look, you know, disturbing, right? So it's just kind of an interesting thing, which it totally makes sense because these movies are silent. So how else are you going to invoke fear into your audience? So a couple other notable films that I found from this era: The Phantom Carriage, The Hands of Orlac, Faust, The Cat and the Canary, The Man Who Laughs, and Haxan, which is like a big witchcraft movie. So again, kind of makes sense with maybe the themes of the time, but you know, then again, maybe not so much. But
yeah, and what I was reading was that I thought was interesting, and this would be like a weird, I don't know how you be in, this must be like Hollywood basements or like in that whole sector of people. Like a lot of these silent films, or some of them were like lost, like completely, and then like rediscovered. There's like a Frankenstein film that like got rediscovered. Like, how does that come about? Like someone's just like, hey man, yeah, I just had it lying in my basement, only copy.
Right. Yeah, I've always wondered how like lost media.
It's someone like runs to the
like, this is the only copy,
and then they go to like, I don't know, who do you go to, like Universal,
right?
Some like where in Hollywood, where do you go and be like, I got this thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. So the first era in your article went up to the 1930s. So what was the second era for you?
So the second era is the golden age of horror cinema. Classic monsters and basically citing
Me too, bro.
big movie stars.
Yeah. What time frame was your article? Mine was 1931 to 1954.
It didn't give a time frame. It usually just puts date up in 1930s to 50s.
Okay, nice. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry. So what were you going? Big movie stars.
No, so like basically like leading from like Chaney's popularity in the previous era, right? And then he starred in 1931's Dracula. Basically, this is where Universal was like, we're just going to start plugging big time actors or just actors and make them like the stars. But I believe this is the era where that started to shift from where before it was like actors were stars. And I think this goes in and out just in film in general. Like we have decades where actors are the stars, then we have decades where the characters are the stars. And this was definitely one where we went from actors being stars to the characters being stars, where Dracula's right. He's the famous thing. It doesn't matter who's playing him. Dracula's the character they go to see, or Frankenstein. And we similar just kind of saw this happen where in the 2000s and 90s, actors were stars.
Yeah.
And then as we move through the 2010s and obviously like the Marvel era, the heroes are the stars kind of thing. Though that one's kind of like a double-edged sword. But interesting that cycle took place, that continues to take place.
Yeah, well, like there's a good example in the superhero realm though of what you're talking about, and that's Spider-Man, because it's been rebooted so many times. Like it doesn't, at the end of the day, like you're going to see Spider-Man, you're not going to see Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield or Tom Holland. You're going to see Spider-Man. So like, I totally get what you're saying, and that's kind of a cool thing to look at, because you'll notice as I rattle off this list of films exactly what Nick's talking about. But yeah, this era, according to my article and the movies that I found, largely dominated by the Universal classic monsters, which, like we just talked about, technically the world's first cinematic universe, which is pretty neat. And again, like Nick said, it kind of makes you sad that Universal's dropped the ball with like the reboot of this cinematic universe. Yeah.
Their big thing that is a thing.
Yeah, this should be easy for you guys. But big films of this era being, of course, Dracula from 1931, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, also from 1931, The Mummy from 1932, The Invisible Man from 1933, Mystery of the Wax Museum, also from 33, The Wolf Man from 41, House of Dracula, 1945, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, 1948. That's kind of like a tongue-in-cheek parody type movie. I think also House of Dracula might have been similar. But then Creature of the Black Lagoon from 1954, which we'll get back to in a second. But some other notable films from this era: Frankenstein, Vampire, Bride of Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein, just Frankenstein's whole family. Dr. Cyclops, Cat People, I Walked with a Zombie, Dead of Night, The Thing, the original The Thing, one of the most, classic horror movies probably of all time. Freaks. But yeah, the Creature of the Black Lagoon, again, is one of those Universal classic monsters, but it also kind of begins the next era of horror, and that is what this article referred to as the Atomic Era. And this goes from 1954 to 1968. And this is all about, your giant monsters, your mad scientists,
space.
Yeah, we're talking about, fears of the times. This was around the time of the hydrogen bomb. So like, people being afraid of, exactly what the era is titled, the Atomic Era, like mutation, nuclear mutation, things like that. These people who are creating these weapons of mass destruction, aka mad scientists, just the fear of this unknown thing. And the creature of the Black Lagoon kind of kicks that off. But what was the next era for you before I rattle off a bunch of these movies?
No, yeah, it was definitely the Atomic Era. And the Beast from like 20,000 Fandoms. I thought that was interesting, in which, basically it's Godzilla, but is this like before? Is this the original Godzilla? That's something I didn't like kind of dig into, but
yeah,
that was one thing I was wondering, because the whole premise of that movie is a military test to awaken a prehistoric creature, right? So that also kind of leads in other films in here that you might mention, like Tarantula or Tarantula or something like that.
No,
all
it's
these
definitely Tarantula.
Is it? Is that how you spell tarantula?
Yeah,
that's
crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah, the beginning of kaiju movies,
right? All that, and I mean, I like those. I guess they're not scary, but I guess they're scary at the time because that's what people feared. Right now, they're more like big monsters, like smashing stuff, because we find big monsters destroying cities cool. Where at that time they were like, that's not cool.
Yeah,
it happens.
What if this could, what if this bomb could mutate a reptile or something, or like a giant monkey from the jungle into this thing that is going to come and hang off buildings and destroy New York City or whatever. I don't know what city King Kong hangs out in. Probably not New York, but some of the big films from this era being Robot Monster from 1953, Godzilla, of course, the original in 1954, Them in 1954, Tarantula in 1955, Attack of the Monster Crabs. That would be terrifying. Like, of all of these things being, a giant tarantula would literally just stop my heart immediately. I would die. But seeing gigantic monster crabs just like crab walking down my neighborhood would also equally terrify me. The Fly, again, one of the most influential body horror movies here in 1958. Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, 1958. That, I mean, from my earlier comment of abnormally tall people, that would be a nightmare for me.
So is Attack on Titan like literally your nightmare?
Well, I mean, it's animated, so it's not that bad.
Man,
yeah,
live action Attack on Titan.
Yeah, that would be weird. I think there's a difference between like giants and just abnormally tall people, and I don't know how to describe that to you. But Chad gets it. Chad understands, which is why I like him so much. And then the last one, Plan 9 from Outer Space, and then kind of not with this whole like atomic era, but falls within the date range. You have Psycho. Some other notable films: Invasion of the Body Snatchers, House on Haunted Hill, The Birds, Repulsion, The Haunting, The Innocents, Kwaidan, Peeping Tom, Black Sunday, Eyes Without a Face, Black Sabbath, not to be confused with the metal band, Ani Baba, Horror of Dracula, Les Diaboliques, The Curse of Frankenstein, The Bad Seed, Carnival of Souls, and The Tingler. But yeah, largely dominated though by these the beginning of the kaiju movement. I would claim myself.
Normal things getting mutated.
Yeah, it's me making a totally like ridiculous statement that's probably not true, but it is in my brain. Yeah, I mean, we're both fans of kaiju films, and I think now you're right. I wouldn't quite consider Godzilla a horror movie. I would consider it more of like an action-y movie. But a movie like Cloverfield, I would consider a horror movie, and that is also a giant monster movie. So
they have roots and influence by the fact that it all started from this as a like, at the time it was a horror genre, but obviously naturally mutated out of it into more action, more sci-fi.
See what you did there?
Yes, right.
Mutated out of it.
Yeah, it kind of evolved into its own I mean, basically, this is where horror spawned its own subgenre or its own genre of things that are no longer considered horror, but kind of stick with us. But at the same time, Alien falls into this category, and Alien can be scary at times. It has definitely horror elements to it, right? The way kind of like the face huggers, different things like that. Jaws, right? That has the classic dun dun, like sharks in the water. Like that's essentially kind of like a horror movie. Like it's got the main premise there down. So
yeah, I agree. And those movies you referenced, they fall into the next era, actually, and that is the first horror renaissance. And this happened from 1968 to 1982. Does this line up with your article?
I think that is being lumped in with my article. Just kind of calls it the atomic age.
Oh, okay. So my article described this as the quote watershed moment in the history of horror cinema. And as I rattle off what they referred to as the most influential films, I think you'll understand why they call this the watershed moment. The big films they referenced being Rosemary's Baby, which is a classic, 1968. Night of the Living Dead, again, classic, 1968. The Omen, 1971. The Exorcist, 1973. Dawn of the Dead, 1978. So those are obviously like massive heavy hitters, and we're starting to get into the era of horror where I've actually seen some of these movies. But here are some other notable films from the era, and I mean, these are huge like titans of horror movies. We have Last House on the Left, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Jaws, Carrie, Suspiria, which I've never seen, but I've heard that it's like just a great horror movie, and it's been remade recently. Invasion of the Body Snatchers remake, Alien, The Shining, The Evil Dead, Poltergeist, Halloween, Friday the 13th, The Entity, An American Werewolf in London, Eraserhead, The Changeling, The Wicker Man, Don't Look Now, The Beyond, Dead and Buried, Zombie 2, Black Christmas, and The Burning. So like there are some titans of horror in that.
Yeah,
lump
and
of movies.
So this is interesting. So I'm just kind of like lining up this article that doesn't quite have exact date ranges for it. So it is interesting how they kind of did the whole atomic age of the 60s, right? Or like the 50s, but looped in, they kind of referenced Alien, Godzilla, Jaws, and all that. So actually their next section is specifically on the 60s.
Okay.
And they touch on this before they get into the 70s and 80s. So this maybe it's like a micro era, and it's the Gothic age of horror. It highlights this, but this leads into some of the themes that do start to come up in the 80s and 70s, and it basically focuses on the fact that they start to lean in more into the blood, the gore, and the sex in these movies. So more classic tales of horror, right? Like Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And there's this one that's called The House on the Haunted Hill, but not to be confused with The Haunting of Hill House. And then House of Usher, which I think came up in a previous episode. Someone mentioned that. I swear they did.
Yeah. No, I'm just kidding.
Not that one. Wrong Usher. But basically, I think this kind of sets up the next era, because they do talk about how they start to add more, essentially women with revealing outfits on, more sexual activity, but also leaning into things like decapitated heads, gushing blood, things like that, which obviously sets up kind of the future. And what was this one's the first horror renaissance?
Yeah.
I'm wondering this is where it starts getting a little blendy here, because
Yeah.
technically my next one that I think overlaps with yours, they call it the slasher era, and basically when serial killers became the new fright amongst the people.
Yeah. So, like before we move on to the next era, I think this one is where like you start to see less of like a theme almost, and this is where
Right.
you just start to get like all sorts of types of horror movies. And you're right, this is kind of where society has just really had its downfall, and we're like, you know what, we're done with extremely pale men in long capes and sharp fangs. Like we want the good stuff. We want to see like a man who wears the skin of his victims and chase them around with a chainsaw. Like,
Well,
we want,
I was gonna say, like, it's almost like speaking from 2020, I guess the perspective of society is up until this point, this is where it pivoted, because everything that came before this was a different point in the way people thought, because things like vampires and Frankenstein and these things those aren't real to us anymore. Whereas back in the day, they came from the Bible. They are more folklore. People had more fundamental understanding and lack of understanding, also fears of things. So these things were more real to them back then. The fact that there could be a Frankenstein, because they didn't understand that it is actually kind of really hard to reconstruct a body. Or vampires might be
for
real.
yourself.
Yeah.
But
I've
reconstructed a few down here.
Yeah, but like the devil or like vampires and things like that, they kind of saw those as actual potential threats, right?
Yeah.
Something to be afraid of. Whereas I think by the 80s and 70s, people were like, yeah, there's not vampires. There's no chance in hell that a vampire is going to come out and get me. But a serial killer.
Yeah. A lunatic with a chainsaw.
Right.
Or definitely chase me down a dirt path.
Or my psycho neighbor that for sure like skins people and wears their skin as a face. Like that's practically that's a thing.
Yeah.
That could be a thing.
Yeah, and then like you said before, I think humanity as a whole is always looking for the next unknown thing, right? I mean, because what outside of this topic here, you wouldn't have innovation if you were satisfied, right? Like technology wouldn't advance if you weren't always pushing the boundaries. And when you apply that to horror movies, you're gonna push boundaries and you're gonna create things people haven't seen before, and that's where you start really getting into like the gore and basically like the torture porn, the like really disturbing, grotesque side of horror that you're starting to see come to fruition here in this first horror renaissance era. It's still not what it is today, but you can see that. I mean, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre is like, for the time, that's pretty disturbing stuff,
Yeah. And could actually happen.
Yeah.
Or did happen, right? Didn't that actually happen?
Well, I don't want to get into that because I'm not sure. So I don't want to like say one way or the other. I'm taking my official stance of no stance.
Gotcha.
But man, if we had a producer for our live stream who could just like fact check stuff while we're talking, that would just be so amazing because they could tell us and then we could tell you guys. So we're going to take a short pause here in the episode. If you would like to be a live stream producer for the Show Boys, send your applications in our Discord. Kidding, but also 100% serious. Nick's going to link the Discord in all of our chats right now. Join and apply today.
Apply today.
But yeah, you also see, old familiars with movies like Poltergeist, where you're dealing with like spiritual stuff, demons, things like that. But we have movies like Halloween, another serial killer. You have movies like American Werewolf in London, which were like, that's just a classic. Like the transformation scene in that movie was revolutionary. Like, it's great. I love it. It's one of the best moments in horror cinema, I believe. B Hero says Texas Chainsaw loosely based in real events. Thank you guys so much for fact checking us and giving us that information. We appreciate it so much. Thank you. But yeah, I don't know. I really agree with this article, with this being like the first renaissance of the genre for sure.
Right.
And then like your article said, the next article from my article, or the next era from my article, they called the Splatter Age, but
Splatter.
I mean, I definitely prefer the Slasher Age, but they basically describe what we now call the slasher genre, along with some other like just gross, gory type films.
Yeah. Well, and so kind of thinking back on, agreeing that that's the first renaissance. So obviously very traditional horror was a thing up until the atomic era, right? So that kind of, it seemed like it tried to evolve, but it evolved into something that was not proper. It wasn't true horror, right? The atomic era, we can all agree, isn't true horror because it evolved into its own style of movie. So that was kind of like a dud, right, in its evolution. So if that would have stuck and landed and it would have remained horror, that would have been the first renaissance. But instead, it kind of done it out.
It was like a horror spin-off.
yeah. So like that didn't have what it took to become the new age of like the reckoning for horror genre. So they took a slight pivot back during the 60s, right, into this kind of gothic era, right? They're just doing the same old stuff. And then the first renaissance happens. So like that definitely makes sense by a long mile.
Yeah, and by no means are we saying like what the atomic era eventually became is like are not good movies. We both love those types of movies. But in terms of the horror genre evolution conversation, you're totally right. Like that kind of just spun off into its own thing and didn't really stick in terms of like horror.
I'm gonna make a brand new type of pie.
Yeah.
Oh nope, that's a cupcake. Never mind. Try again.
Yeah, still great, but not a pie.
Not a pie.
So when did the slasher age start, according to your article?
It basically reckons it in with Halloween in 1978.
Okay.
And then there's a 1981. Basically 80, 78, 80, and then basically Halloween, Friday the 13th, that whole surge of things.
Yeah. So they had my article had the influential films of this era being, which I think is kind of funny because, well, I mean, okay, I get it. The Thing remake in 1982, gross body horror. Reanimator in 1985, which, by the way, Tom, if you're the one out there controlling the B Hero account, this is a movie you recommended, I believe, in our Discord. Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984. The Fly remake in 1986. Again, like just disgusting body horror. And then Evil Dead 2 in 1986. And then some other notable films from this era that I found were Return of the Living Dead, Day of the Dead, Hellraiser, Demons, Videodrome, The Vanishing, Misery, Near Dark, Opera, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, Society, The Stuff, and Creepshow. But yeah, I would say, maybe slashers, this would definitely be the start, but not like the main focus, I think, of this era. Now that I'm, talking this out loud, I think the Splatter age definitely is a good description because it just has a lot of gross gore,
Right. Yeah. And that's where kind of, the Gothic era kind of leaned into that and started this, where Hollywood was just getting more liberal with sex, gore, and blood in general. And then there's also like a sprinkle, like while this is kind of like slasher, but it was also like there was a blend of supernatural in there, because obviously like Freddy Krueger, that's not, he's like dream hopping, like you can't physically do that.
The horror version of Inception.
Right. Yeah. And my article does link The Exorcist like right at the dawn of this era, right?
Okay.
So it's just kind of like the different kind of takes on that, but that one's like purely supernatural horror. So, and obviously like each of these eras, like they're not restricted to this type of stuff. There's always sprinklings of everything all throughout.
I'm sure we've left out a lot of of movies that people are probably like screaming like, this was in that time period, blah, how could you have forgotten? But you know what, I'm gonna make another disclaimer. I know we're an hour and a half in, but neither of us are typically considered horror fans, so this is all coming from a non-horror fan perspective too, which kind of made it fun to do in a way. But I just want to throw that out there now, because I think that kind of covers our butts from any sort of glaring mistake that we have already made or will make as we round out the episode.
I've made a couple already. I've realized.
So hopefully to anyone that is listening that is like a huge horror fan, hopefully we're not completely butchering this stuff for you. And hopefully what we're talking about kind of makes sense, and I don't know, hopefully you enjoy the non-horror fan take on this, because I mean it's fun. Not that I don't like horror, it's just not like my main cup of tea, right?
Well, also I guess in my experience, horror is kind of like behind closed doors. So a lot of things people will just tell you about. So like if there was like an action movie and I was like, oh yeah, just tell me about it, I'm not going to watch it, right? So you're just going to tell me what Tom Cruise does in Mission Impossible 7. That's pretty easy, right? But these, I feel like horror fans, right, they're more likely to be like, no, you got to watch it, because they don't want to ruin anything, because if they ruin it, it defeats the whole point of the movie, especially like scary movies and stuff. Like if you were to, you can't give anything away, because the whole point, and that's one thing I do like about these movies. For some reason, they have an extra draw to them where you have to sit and watch them and let it slowly kind of come to you.
Yeah.
And usually horror fans, they're just such diehard fans that they don't want to ruin anything for you. But at the same time, I'm probably not going to watch it. So then it just gets left in this black box of a ton of movies I'm never going to watch, or will slowly get to.
Yeah, and your point is very, very good there too, because like with an action movie or a superhero movie, like even if someone tells you what's going to happen, you still want to see how it happens, right?
I still want to see Iron Man and Captain America fight,
right?
Even though I know what Civil War is about without seeing it.
Yeah, but if you take away the mystery of a horror movie, then you've defeated the purpose of the entire genre, which is to catch you off guard and surprise you and shock you. You can't be surprised and shocked if you know what's coming. And yeah, that's a great point. Really like that. Making a lot of great points tonight.
That's why we're here.
Yeah. So what does your next era kind of like? I think mine's a little more specific. So, but then again, you had that like weird micro era in the 60s. So what like, according to my article, we're up to 1991 now. So have we skipped over anything from what you looked at?
You might have a micro era.
Okay. So this is the splatter age is my micro era. What's your next one?
Well, mine skips to essentially kind of like the 2000s, late 90s, like like the Saw era, basically. Like
Okay,
an era focused on torture, depravity, shock, and awe. Basically, this is the point in time where all the stuff that we haven't seen yet, they're going to start pulling out of the shed.
Okay, so I have one more micro era before we get into the Saw era, because that is an era named in my article. So between the Splatter age and the Saw era, we have the Dark Age, and that's from 91 to 2002. And they describe this as the horror genre taking a turn and beginning to expand out into psychological horror and kind of blending and bleeding into other genres. So some of the notable films they had: Silence of the Lambs in 1991, which started this era, which is, you know, kind of like 1/3 horror, I think they described, and 2/3 cop procedural. Man, I can't say. Yeah, I can't say that word. But then they have Man Bites Dog in 1992, Scream in 1996, Ringu in 1998, The Sixth Sense 1999, another one of those. It is a horror movie, but it's very much psychological. The Blair Witch Project, yeah, very suspenseful. The Blair Witch Project in 99, The Devil's Backbone in 2001, and some other films I found in this era include Bram Stoker's Dracula, Dead Alive, Kronos, Scream 2, Audition, and Ginger Snaps.
Scream 2.
Yeah, Scream and Scream 2. But yeah, like, you know, Scream is definitely a slasher movie, but it's also like a comedy. So like, again, you have that blending of genres there. It's very campy, tongue in cheek,
breaking the fourth wall and stuff.
Yeah. You have The Blair Witch, which is very much horror, but also could be argued the beginning of found footage, which found footage isn't always horror, though it mostly, I would say, is, you know, consists of horror movies. But yeah, we have that like little micro era there, and then my article goes into the Saw era being from 2003 to 2009. So it almost lines up with yours. It starts a little later than yours, but I think probably goes to about the same point.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about this era in my article, in your article, that your 90s there called that the Dark Age. The author of my article specifically calls out this 2000s era as the Dark Age, just because it's their least favorite.
Right.
I think just like fundamentally they don't agree with how heavily it relied on just straight up kill scenes.
Yeah.
You know, obviously Saw's Hostel, right? I'm pretty sure is in this bucket.
Yep.
And like, I remember seeing Hostel for the first time, and I mean that starts like the first horrific thing in that is just it's still painful to this day.
Well, I'd say those two could be the beginning of the torture porn like subgenre of horror, where it's just pure torturing people, and yeah,
it's just it's no longer scary. It's just like hard
to watch.
Yeah.
I can't believe you're doing that to a person.
and I guess that's kind of where my article is coming from, in the sense that like they're like, this is the Dark Age, like this isn't horror, this isn't scary, it's just simply
shock
sick.
and awe.
Yeah, it's just sick and disturbing.
Yeah, so they describe this as mostly dominated, or the most dominant characteristic of this era is the obsession with torture. So yeah, Saw 2003, Hostel 2005, 28 Days Later in 2002, not falling into that torture porn category. One of my favorite movies, though, I'd say 28 Days Later. But some other notable films from this era that don't quite fall into that category as well would be Shaun of the Dead, which could be considered horror because it's a zombie movie, but it's very much a comedy. Wreck or Quarantine, as Biosiv brought up last week. The Descent, Let the Right One In, Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, The Orphanage, Trick or Treat, The Host, Lake Mungo, which also came up last week's episode. Great movie. And Martyrs, which Martyrs very much is a torture porn movie. I have not seen it, but I've seen it pop up on a lot of disturbing movie videos I've watched, and it sounds highly disturbing. But yeah, man, do you have much more to say about this genre? Did I leave anything out?
I don't think so. And this is obviously where all this is much more recent memory, obviously for us and the viewers. I mean, this is, especially for our generation, this was kind of like the staple era, right? Because we were all mostly like teens and like young adolescents during kind of like the 90s and the screams and you know, we were catching up on all that, and then obviously this is when this stuff all really started to hit off. So I guess we instantly got desensitized to things. We're like, oh, this is normal.
Yeah, whatever.
This is normal.
I would say so far out of all the eras, I would say this one might be, well, I don't want to say that it's my least favorite because there are good movies, but I would say of like the subgenres of horror, like this torture, like just incredibly disturbing gore is my least favorite subgenre of horror for sure. But
yeah, and I think there's just like this, I don't know, like it's a hard group watch. I think like you can't get a bunch of people together. I mean, maybe you could, but like, hey, I'm gonna have a bunch of friends over. Guess what we're watching tonight? We're watching Hostel. And everyone's like, oh, it's gonna be that kind of like.
Have you guys ever seen someone's mouth get sewed onto another person's rectum? Like, dude, it is so great. Let's watch this movie. It's called Human Centipede. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
And I just feel like, I don't know, maybe, and that's where it also is weird that, right, you use the phrase, what kind of porn?
Torture porn,
right? So it's almost like these movies are best watched by yourself because they're so disturbing.
Yeah.
Right.
And one thing that I wanted to say that I forgot about when you were saying how like horror is kind of like, what'd you say, like behind closed doors or whatever?
Yeah.
When you described it like that, I immediately thought of this like era, because like when you were talking about like the latest action movie, you're not going to go to work, hang out around the water cooler and be like, dude, I grabbed a plate of nachos and I watched this movie called Human Centipede. You'll never guess what they did. They literally sewed a person's mouth onto another person's butthole for like 7 people in a row. And they were just like pooping into each other's mouths, like all the way till it gets to the end. Like it was a great movie. Like you never walk into a break room and hear somebody like loudly, openly discussing that like in the work environment. Whereas if someone saw the latest Mission Impossible, be like, oh my gosh, can you believe that like helicopter stunt Tom Cruise did? So that's where my mind went, but I know also what you were talking about.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, that's exactly it. Cause like you wouldn't, now I'm just picturing breaking into the workroom and being like, dude, I watched this sweet movie last night that this chick totally got raped and then like they cut her head off and then they put it on, you know, whatever. Like just imagine it. It's in these movies, right? So it's just like, imagine the worst thing ever and then times 10. And like, so everyone's like, so wait, you liked this movie?
Yeah. What's wrong with you psycho? Yeah, it's like this isn't in this era, but like we talked about a Serbian film with Jordan whenever he was on like 2 weeks ago or something, and that's like heralded as the most disturbing movie like ever made or whatever. And I have not seen it, but I've watched a handful of videos that talk about it, and it's like you couldn't catch me like dead talking about the events of that movie in a public place.
Right.
Like, I mean, I would talk about it on this podcast because that's what we talk about, but like I wouldn't just be like at Giant Eagle, like looking at bread and being like, "So Beck, I watched this movie last night. You never guess what happened." B Hero chimes in. They say, "If you go into it with the right mindset, it's a great time. You must be a closeted serial killer." And then they also say, "Bah ha 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 ha! You've been to my work." Well, I've heard you and Brian work together, so that does not surprise me. But yeah, you ready to move on to my article's last era? Do you have any more than one more era?
It's basically one more era.
Okay, I asked that really, like, I said that sentence very weirdly.
Strange.
The next era described in my article goes from 2009 to 2019, and they refer to this as the second horror renaissance. And this laced with social commentary and deconstruction of the tropes of the genre, challenging horror to do better. Does that sound about right in the description, or close in title to your articles?
Yes, correct. And I don't know if it's just the fact that it's kind of like almost the most current era, or like the one that is obviously most fresh in our minds, but I think these are this is my favorite era.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just maybe I'm just basic with the
No, there's a
times.
lot of really good movies in
Right.
here. Because like
are they really good because that's where our social commentary is at?
It could be. I think also because kind of like how the Dark Age started blending horror into other genres. I think what makes this era so great is because horror has expanded into so many different genres of movies. So you're not just I mean, you still have your classic like movies that are solely focused on like one, theme or whatever. Like, for example, Paranormal Activity, right? It's like a supernatural ghost movie. But you also have movies like Get Out, which is a great horror movie, but it's more than a horror movie.
Right.
Movies like one of my favorite movies that I don't know if anyone's seen, but it's called The Killing of a Sacred Deer. And it's like super weird, suspenseful, psychological, but very much doesn't look like a horror movie, but is very unsettling and could fall within the genre, I think. But I think the gates are so wide here in the second Renaissance era that it just allows for there to be, just by percentages or whatever, you're going to have better movies because there's more options, right? I guess that's what I was trying to say. It took me a while to get there, but does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's just they're leaning into more quality storytelling and obviously just tying more concepts into these movies.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, Get Out. So like I think this article puts it well. So like they used horror to tell a message about race and culture.
Yeah.
And obviously it got Oscar for it, or it was at least nominated for it.
Yeah, and I mean, this social commentary didn't start with this era, right? It's like it's these things are obviously undertones in all art. That's what art does, right? But like, I don't know. I think maybe you're onto something here with it being like recent and familiar because these are the times we're living in.
Right.
So like these hit harder. So maybe if we were living back in like the atomic era and, we had like real threat of, I mean, we do have real threat of a nuclear war, but we
don't care anymore.
We understand what happens. Whereas back then it was very new and you didn't know what would happen.
Yeah, they thought it could just pop off tomorrow. At least right now, we're like, it could pop off tomorrow, but it's probably not because it's been 50 years and nothing's really happened because they're all just calling each other shit on it.
Right. But we understand the ramifications. Like, just everyone's going to die. Like,
yeah.
But back then, like, that.
Let's get under our desk and we'll survive.
Right, like who
Duck and
knows?
cover.
Maybe it'll make like again, like maybe it'll mutate our gorillas into a giant King Kong, and
yes, perfect.
But like we know that's not going to happen. Just everyone's going to die.
And back like the social commentary, like even like Halloween, Scream, like those movies had social commentary in them, but they were like the sub filler. Like it's basically what was going on with the kids, the teens, in that, but like that had nothing to really do with the fact that Jason's coming to get you. Well, it kind of did a little bit, very faintly.
I think it might, again, like I don't know, because like if I was 34 back when Scream came out, would I have noticed the commentary? Right? Would I have understood more? Maybe I need to go back and like rewatch it and see if it hits differently if I pick anything else up, or if it's just because of, again, like our age, and since we're living through these times that we like can pick up on it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But like we might not have picked up on Scream's social commentary because we were like 10, right? So our brain didn't go there. But maybe to my parents who watched Scream back then, they're like, oh yeah, blah, 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 blah. I really liked what they were saying about this.
Yeah.
Or, you know what I mean?
Right.
But I would have to agree with you. I think this is probably my favorite because there are so many great movies in here. Some of the influential films that they referenced are Paranormal Activity from 2009, which also, interesting fact here, the most profitable movie ever made based on the return on investment. So
wow. Well, yeah, because that was, that was cheap.
Didn't
budget.
take much to make, and
it's like $30,000.
Yeah, not much. We do have a comment here that we'll get to after I rattle through these movies. So Cabin in the Woods from 2012, It Follows from 2014, The Babadook from 2014, Good Night Mommy from 2014. Big year, 2014, for the horror genre. Hereditary in 2018, A Quiet Place in 2018, and of course, you cannot forget about The Purge, and back in 2013. Some other notable films I found in this era being Attack the Block, The Conjuring, The Witch, Get Out, We Are What We Are, Starry Eyes, We Need to Talk About Kevin, which I want to see this movie so bad, but I keep putting it off. Same with Attack the Block. Raw, The Nightmare, We Are Still Here, A Dark Song, The Invitation, In Fabric, They Look Like People. Just to name a few. But
Paranormal Activity had a budget of $15,000.
How much did it make? $15,000 to make that movie. Wow.
Yeah, I said 30. I'm proud of myself.
That was really close. Yeah,
$193 million it made in the box office.
How much did Blair Witch cost to make? I'd be surprised if it was more or less than Paranormal Activity.
Oh, I think that was 300,000.
Really? Wow. So while you're looking that up, B Hero says two of my fans from this era, I think he meant to say faves, are The Babadook and The Ritual. I've heard great things about The Ritual. Another one on my list that I need to watch. The Babadook's wonderful allegory of grief, and The Ritual is like if Blair Witch wasn't found footage and didn't suck.
That's funny.
I hope Chad's not here. The Blair Witch is his jam.
$300K for Blair Witch, and it made $250 million. So dang. Paranormal Activity wins.
Yeah, that's crazy. $15,000 to make that movie. That's right. Insane. But yeah, do you have any I mean, I know you're not I'm probably a bigger horror fan than you, but I'm not much of a horror fan, so that says I think more about you than me when it comes to picking maybe a favorite movie or something. You probably don't. I would go out on a limb and say you probably don't have a favorite horror movie per se or anything out of this era, do you?
Get Out's really good. So is A Quiet Place. I just kind of like these movies, and I watched them once. There's definitely by no means a genre where I think I repeat watch. Yeah. Now, I have seen The Ring many times.
Yeah, same. Me too.
So
a lot of times.
There's something about the 2000s, but the 2000s paranormal stuff, and then how that subcategory of activity in horror evolved into, The Conjuring, right? And
Yeah.
in my mind, like that's where that doesn't really like The Conjuring. Where does that fall? Because that obviously came out in this era, but
It's in the second Renaissance here.
yeah. So I mean, but it's not really social commentary much. It's more about telling like a real story, and it's more of like possessed
Mhm.
objects and things like that. I like that kind of stuff. And like even with Insidious, right? There is basically the haunting stuff I really like.
Yeah.
Back to Mike Flanagan, shout out.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that's the stuff that I like a lot. And maybe that doesn't necessarily fit into any kind of, that's just always been around in my mind. Like that,
Mhm.
for the most part. And that's been its kind of own thread through the whole horror
The
genre.
consistent, right? Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense. Some of my personal favorite movies per se, because I think if we're just gonna say flat out, my favorite horror piece at this time probably would be Haunting of Hill House, and we'll see how Midnight Mass plays out. I'm 2 episodes in. I really enjoy it, but I think
You'll like Haunting more.
yeah, okay,
But that's
Yeah,
not. But that's no dig on.
right. But in my mind, The Haunting of Hill House, that series is just pert near
Every time I
perfect.
see
Yeah.
her, because she's in like all 3 at this point,
Yeah,
I want to
Well, 'cause
watch
I
Haunting
think
at Hill's House.
I think she's married to Mike Flanagan, which would probably explain
Good for
why.
him.
Right, I know, dude. Is she like really pregnant when this show was made? Like, is she actually having a baby?
Maybe, I don't know.
Anyways, but yeah, so some of my personal favorite movies, they all kind of come out of this era here. Cargo, which is a zombie movie. I think you might be able to find it on Netflix, but it was started out as a short film. I think it was like 7 minutes long. Got some great reception, and they decided to develop it into a feature, and it was really good. I think Martin Freeman is the lead in that. Midsummer, I've talked about a ton. One of my favorites. The Fourth Kind, of course, talked about a ton. Get Out, again, just a fantastic movie. I have Us. I haven't watched it yet. I bought it on Black Friday for super cheap, and it's just sitting right here on my piano, along with all my other movies, just waiting to be watched. And then I mentioned The Killing of a Sacred Deer a little bit ago. That movie's really good, and I hope people will watch it. It's a deep cut, but it's really good. Also has like Colin Farrell and Nicole Kidman in it, and it's great. You should watch it. Yeah. Do you have anything else before we jump into our Answer the Boys replies?
I don't think so. I mean, I did enjoy learning about this, and maybe this will help me focus in. Now I was going to ask you, so having gone through this, if you were to start catching up on this, consider this a separate pile of backlog to work through. Where would you start? Would you start at the beginning as best you could?
Nah.
So like which era would you start in if you wanted to do some like serious catch up?
This era, the most recent, the second Renaissance. There are a ton of movies in this era that I want to watch really bad, but I guess in my old age, I've just lost the joy in intentionally scaring myself. So like, which is funny because most of my time spent on YouTube is watching like horror related things, whether it's like ARGs, analog horror, disturbing videos, like Nexpo content, Night Docs, Mr. GG's like horror movie reviews, lists of like the best horror movies, most disturbing horror movies you should watch that nobody's ever heard of. Like I watch a ton of that stuff and I'm always like, oh, that movie looks great. I really want to watch that. And then when it's time to watch a movie, I'm never like, it's 11 o'clock at night. I want to throw this really disturbing horror movie on before I go to bed. Like, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, I would totally have seen all of these movies, which I used to watch a ton of horror movies back then. But I don't know. I think I've just matured. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. It just kind of lost its luster. But if I were to go back and like catch up, like you said, I would start in this, second horror renaissance era and watch all of these movies that I've been already creating a backlog of. I just like the psychological movies like It Follows. So like one that is on the list here is We Need to Talk About Kevin. And it's like one of those like just kind of like unsettling, disturbing psychological horror movies. I would probably start with that. The Ritual, like Tom mentioned here in the comments, is one of the ones that's on my there's so many that I want to watch, but I just don't actually want to watch them, if that makes any sense. I don't know if it does. It probably sound like a lunatic, but
no, I mean, that's my question. I mean, this is where you want to start.
Yeah. What about you?
Stuff. I think I owe it to fans of this genre that I actually sit down and digest the slasher era, right? So like the Halloweens, Freddy Krueger, and I've seen these, but they were, in passing as a child or just like many years ago, and I just feel like I need a proper refresher just because it was like the first renaissance of it. And there's that pivotal moment that just seems really cool to me. And if it's not that, there's just something about like the golden age, and I hold this too for like so like all the historical pieces, all the historical timepieces, like 300, right? Like I want to go back and watch the original 300 that was made in the 60s. So like there's this, I want to go watch like old like 50s and 60s movies because they were all kind of like the first adaptations to film for a lot of these things, and then obviously it's all been remade over the years. So a refresh on the slasher / renaissance era, and then maybe like hitting some of these like classics, like the stone cold black and white classics from way back when.
I would definitely agree with you with like my second option being the first horror renaissance. So the starting at the late 60s up to like the early 90s, so including starting with things like Rosemary's Baby.
That sounds terrifying.
I know. And then including all the way up to like the remake of The Thing and The Fly and Hellraiser, Halloween, the Texas Chainsaw Massacres, the Carries, the Suspirias, those that would definitely be my second option. And then a close third, of course, would be the Golden Age, like you said, catching up on all those classic Dracula, where like the Wolfman,
right,
Black Lagoon. That would be really cool, actually.
And of course, I think it should, if I can, I'm gonna find that 3-minute first one ever if it exists.
Yeah, dude, try to find that for sure. That'd be a really interesting watch. I'm sure it's on YouTube somewhere, right?
I hope. YouTube, don't fail me now.
Right. Yeah, so that's great. That's good question to end on there before we get into the Answer the Boys stuff. So of course, we threw this up in our Answer the Boys channel and Discord. We said, do you have any cool, or first we said we will be taking a journey through the decades, looking at how the horror genre has grown and evolved over time, and some of the acclaimed movies and some of our personal favorites in each decade. Do you have any cool facts or thoughts on the evolution of horror over time? Which decade do you think was the best for the horror genre? What are some of your favorite movies from each decade? So with that being said, let's go through our replies here. We got a good amount, which is always cool. Cozy Contagion says, every film that Rob Zombie has put out has been nothing short of mind-blowing, in my opinion. I know lots of people trash his version of the Halloween movies because they're so violent, but honestly, that's what it's all about, being simply horrifying and graphic. How ungory can you actually make a slasher movie? And then he also said the fourth kind has always stuck with me. Yeah, I mean, great point.
I need to rewatch the fourth kind because you guys said it so many times and I've not seen it since it came out.
Dude, it's so good. He makes a good point, though. You can't really make a slasher movie without being a little graphic, you know? I mean, you can, but I feel like done right, that could definitely up the ante.
And that's the other thing. I want to watch those so I can see what the deal is, because very quickly we got the other side of it, because he poses that question, right, or that statement that people didn't like it, and old Tom here is the counter to that.
Yes.
To that stance, which is great.
Yeah, he says, I don't trash it because it's violent. I trash it because it's the worst directed and choreographed violence I've seen. Much to do with its repetitive, unimaginative nature. I don't mind Rob Zombie, but I can't stand his take on Halloween. Not to mention he completely missed the point of Michael Myers by trying to humanize him, but to each their own. Hey, as someone who's not a huge fan of this genre or the Halloween series in general, and that's just because of not seeing it, I have no opinion on the matter. So it was interesting to see both sides of this coin here with Rob Zombie and the Halloween franchise. Cozy Contagion, of course, couldn't disagree more. Michael Myers was human at one point. I'm just airing out all their dirty laundry here live on the podcast, but it was a good discussion. Of course, it's exactly what it was, a discussion. Tom then retorts. Let me find it. Here it is. Michael Myers is supposed to represent evil incarnate, an unstoppable force, a human child possessed by an otherworldly evil entity. John Carpenter didn't want him to be explained or have a human element. That's why he never really showed his face. Every Halloween since has gone against his original vision, which in my mind is the perfect slasher film. But I respect where you're coming from, and there's nothing wrong with your perspective, just explaining mine. I can relate this in a weird way to the Joker and how I felt with the Joker movie with Joaquin Phoenix, where they explain the Joker's backstory. I think what made the Joker such a great villain is the lack of his backstory.
He has no origin. He just appeared.
Yeah.
And he is chaos.
Exactly. He is, as Michael Myers is evil incarnate, the Joker is chaos incarnate. So I could totally relate to what Tom is saying here with my thoughts on the Joker. However, I actually ended up really liking the Joker, the movie The Joker with Joaquin Phoenix. But I felt the way Tom feels about Rob Zombie's attempt on the Halloween franchise.
Dad feels
when it was announced. Yes, there were feels for sure. Tom then he had a comment here on It Follows, and he said it's an interesting one, kind of overrated but still decent. There are a few things I really like about it, such as the teenagers' avoidance of their parents or adults, feeling like they can't trust the adults around them. Definitely reminds me of my teenage years in a lot of ways. That is an interesting point. I want to look into that more, why that was there, because it was intentionally there. Because the few scenes they showed of the main character's mom, she was like passed out with a bunch of like wine bottles and alcohol, like
two turn up.
Yeah. And then Greg's mom also didn't seem to be shown in the most favorable light. So yeah, definitely want to look into that. Tom then says, Tom is a big horror fan, if you haven't figured this out. So he had a lot to say.
He's the guy.
Yeah, some of my faves from each decade. Well, it would be a crime to say that anything other than John Carpenter's The Thing for the 80s. My personal fave from the 70s is Alien. The 90s had a ton of epic horror: Scream, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, Silence of the Lambs, Candyman. Last night I watched The House is October Built. The House is October Built. Very effective, unsettling found footage film with the most underwhelming ending ever. Wah, wah. Cozy Contagion says Scream is definitely a classic, Nightmares included. Mel had a nice comment here, and rounding out our Answer the Boys segment, she says, I have so much trouble picking my favorite anything, but I will try. For the 70s, it's a toss-up between The Exorcist and Amityville Horror for my favorites, though Alien, Jaws, and The Omen are very close seconds. Yeah, another movie that there were a lot of movies that I've seen. So before I go into that, as always, when we pick a specific topic about things we've watched or played, of course, immediately everything I've watched or played that we're about to talk about like escapes my mind and I can't remember. It's terrible. I hate it. But she brings up movies like Amityville Horror, which is a great movie. And I'm sure like it didn't come up on any of the lists I looked at, which I looked at like 5 or 6 lists of like, top 100 horror movies. And I'm sure there are a ton of other movies like Amityville Horror that were really good movies that I completely forgot about that I've seen that should have been included in our eras here. But yeah, I'm excited to get to the rest of her comment. 1, because I haven't read it yet. And 2, I'm sure she has some other movies like that thrown in here.
Amityville is also a very good Eminem song.
There you go. You heard it here first. The 80s is really difficult because it gave rise to so many classic franchises that I love, but also had The Lost Boys, which is still one of my favorite movies. Hard agree. Lost Boys, great movie. Kiefer Sutherland is the only man that can make a platinum blonde mullet look sexy, I swear. Can't disagree with that. Have you seen The Lost Boys, Nick?
Nope.
Oh, dude, it's so good.
What's it about?
It's a vampire movie. It's so good. It's really, really good. And Poltergeist still scares me to this day. As far as the big franchises that were born that decade, Nightmare on Elm Street is my favorite. The 90s is probably my favorite decade, but I'm also a 90s kid, so go figure. I think I've said this before, but Silence of the Lambs is my absolute favorite movie of all time. I've watched it dozens of times and even wrote a few papers about it for various assignments while getting my degree. Village of the Damned also has a special place in my heart, but that is because I have fond memories of watching it with my grandfather who passed a few years ago. Sorry to hear that, but I think that's a cool thing too about like music and movies and shows and stuff, like the bond that you can share with people like you did with your grandfather. She also says Scream, The Haunting, The Faculty, I Know You Did Last Summer, Dracula. I love me some Gary Oldman. I forgot about that. Candyman, of course, like Tom mentioned. I go on about 90s horror for ages. I just love it. For the 2000s, American Psycho is a guilty pleasure of mine, one of my guilty pleasure movies. I also really like Jennifer's Body, though I know is pretty panned by the critics. A few other favorites from that time would be Saw, The Grudge, 13 Ghosts, and Slither. I know it's horror comedy, but I don't care. She brings up a lot of movies that didn't make our list.
Yeah, so back to the 2000s. I mean, that might be like just by nature, like my favorite one, just because there's a lot in there that I like. But American Psycho, that's like one of my favorite movies ever.
Nice.
Christian Bale I like Christian Bale movies in general. Yeah. But that movie is good. Have you seen that?
No. That was a great gasp. You need to clip that. We need to use that as a soundbite. We got a comment here. Yusuf says 13 Ghosts with Matthew Lillard is banging. I do remember 13 Ghosts. It was a favorite of mine back then. I was, in my early to mid teens. I forget exactly when that came out, but yeah, definitely watched that quite a bit. Just an update for anyone who was wondering and on the edge of their seat. Nick appears to have found the 3-minute horror movie from 1896. I see a YouTube link appear on my show notes page. So
let's watch it right now.
Let's throw it up. Thank you guys all for chiming in the Answer the Boys topic for this week. We really appreciate it. We love hearing from you guys and getting to read your comments on the show. It always adds a lot.
You rock.
Yes. So last piece of business here before we end the episode. We didn't really get any movie suggestions and Answer the Boys.
I'm watching The Lost Boys. You're watching American Psycho.
I mean, we could do that if you want.
Is that fair?
Or
should we pick one of the ones that Yusuf suggested last?
Well, that's the thing. We could let's decide how to approach this week, because I think the 2 different reviews was cool. And if we're going like older horror movies, I would definitely recommend Lost Boys for you. But if you want to stick to doing the same movie like we did this time, I'm down for doing that as well.
I want you. One, I like vampires. So if it's vampires and it's a horror movie and it's thematic to the month, I want to watch Lost Boys. And I really want you to watch American Psycho.
Okay. I like this. And then next week, if we don't, we can pick a movie to watch jointly again. I like the alternating here. This is good. American Psycho, definitely. I'll give it a watch, and we'll have a short little segment next week like we did this week. This week's segment actually was not short at all. It was like 50 minutes long or something. But yeah, all right, there you go. Our picks are in. I'll be watching American Psycho. Nick will be watching The Lost Boys. And of course, like we did this week and the week before, at the start of our episode, we will be reviewing these movies. I might actually watch The Lost Boys again too, just because it's been so long since I've seen that movie.
They look like they're both renters.
Rip. Big rip. I mean, I had to download Peacock to watch It Follows.
Hey, that's not okay. Pause. Time out. Peacock, pretty decent app. At least on the PlayStation.
For being the free version has a good amount of stuff on there, and the ads they're not Hulu. Like the ad breaks were like 30 seconds long. And
so when we were watching It Follows, right? Mm-hmm. All the ads are in the first half of the movie, which makes so much freaking sense because you don't want to disturb that end half. And they almost were like they were at correct or natural like break points. It was. I really appreciate it after having shared our frustrations with Hulu and their excessive amount of ads and all that kind of stuff. So that was nice for a free thing.
Yeah, for sure. Like I got annoyed at first when the first ad popped up, but then it was like 20 seconds long and that was it. And then the other ad breaks, there weren't many, but the other ones were also really short. So I was like, okay, this isn't bad.
It's like 4 or 5 all under a minute.
Like
all in the first half of the movie. That I thought was so considerate of them to say we'll disrupt the building part of the movie and then not disturb you. I wonder if it's just because it's like the type of movie or if it's all things. But yeah, Peacock, not bad. Easy to sign up. It's free. Might as well. You get all of NBC stuff, even though like not sure what that is, but obviously like SVU, all that crap. So if you like that, it's not a bad thing to have installed on hand.
Ooh, you might be able to watch The Lost Boys on HBO Max. Sorry.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah. Oh, dang. What? I don't even remember where I was going with this conversation. But yeah, that's it for the episode tonight. We're done. We hope you enjoyed your trip, our trip, coming along this trip with us through the eras of the horror genre. And hopefully to you super horror fans out there, we did it a little bit of justice, and
Just a little bit.
Didn't sound like complete nincompoops over here. But yeah, if you have any comments you want us to know about the different eras of horror, or what your favorite era is, or some of your favorite movies, let us know in the comments here on YouTube, or you can throw them up in the Discord as well. But yeah, I think that about does it for us tonight. Again, just wanted to remind you, if you like what you heard tonight, please consider subscribing, liking, rating, reviewing, following wherever you're listening or watching this episode on. And check out our Patreon at patreon.com/showboyspodcast. Yeah, you might see us stream a game or two here between episodes of the podcast. But yeah, until then, we hope you have a wonderful weekend. You have anything else to say before we throw on our bumpin' theme?
Subscribe to Showboys Gaming YouTube channel.
Nice. Definitely do that. All right, guys. We'll see you next week. Have a wonderful evening.
Spooky.
Dude, I just scared the crap out of myself. Like, I'm just sitting here like digging the theme, and like I bumped my chair on my desk or something, and it shook my chair, and I was like, oh my god, what just hit my chair? Like I literally freaked myself out. So
It's
I kind of
okay.
wish that was on camera, because it probably looked hilarious.
It's okay. Actually, on camera, I'll find the timestamp for it, but I killed a bug that was crawling over here on the banister, and I could see myself in the replay just like attacking something.